Welcome back to West Texas View.
Welcome back to the West Texas View. I'm Johnny Lou Avery, and you've already met Bill Brandt and Larry Sanders, who are here from the International Herald of Truth. And this is an organization that I've watched grow up as I've been growing up, and I am so impressed with what they do and how they do it, and I wanted to share that with you. And so we were talking about how you went into Cuba and now you're into Africa and how it's a completely different ball game. So now continue that story.
Well, and let me tell you the most recent. I was there this summer. You can't get to Africa from Abilene, Texas. You have to go other places. I was 50 hours in an airplane
I know.
or an airport, flew overnight to London, spent the day in London, then flew overnight to Joburg, with those of us who travel a lot, called Johannesburg, Joburg, where it's winter, and then another 2 hours to Malawi, Africa. I get off the plane in Malawi, Africa, and all of a sudden notice there are a lot of these guards with machine guns. Okay, I've never been to Malawi before, maybe this is normal. It wasn't. The day before, for the first time ever, there was a major strike in Malawi against the government. Now, in the United States, we have that kind of stuff all the time, major protest. This is unheard of in Malawi. The day I arrive, the protest had gotten violent and 19 people had been killed, thus the presence of the machine guns and the policemen. I get off the plane, Steve Ridgel is with me, my colleague. We get into a van and drive another 12 hours north to Tanzania. That's how we pronounce it. There they pronounce it Tanzania. It's a British colony, of course, and so they still maintain that cultural. So we go to Tanzania. We go to a small city called Mbeya. Mbeya is some asphalt streets, mostly dirt streets. We go to a little congregation, and I'm looking for the big church building, because that's what we have here in the United States. And finally, we park in front of this church building, and it is a straw, mud-type structure hut. Has no floor except dirt. Has no electricity. While there are frames in the windows, there are no glass. The bathrooms are a slit trench in the back. Those of you with military background will understand what that is. And the pews were pieces of wood about this wide, about this long, that hurt after I sat for 10 minutes on them.
And hung over.
And yes, ma'am, both sides. And so here we are, and we stayed there for 3 days. And I was amazed that we had people from Uganda come. I'd have to tell a story. I was telling them, boy, you know, I spent a lot of time in an airplane coming here, you know, 50 hours.
Feel
and then
so sorry
another
for
10,
me.
oh my. And this gentleman looks at me from Uganda and says, well, I've been on the road for 6 days. Walking and riding, because they had some buses. And this father and son from Zambia were there at the place where we had been a couple of years before, and said, well, we've been on the road too for 5 to 6 days, walking and riding buses to get here.
300 kilometers, I believe.
It was phenomenally long. And I'm sitting there going, oh my, shut up, Bill, and just tell the story. And so we stayed there for 3 days, had worship Sunday morning. The translator, Brother Lawrence, as I called him, translated for me as we spoke. And we sang and we sang and we spoke and we spoke. And, you know, churches in America, the preacher preaches for 20 minutes maximum, and then we may have another 40 minutes of songs, and we're out.
And they say, okay, the cowboy game comes on.
Or we want to beat so-and-so to the restaurants. So there we stayed for 2 hours. And finally we had to say, we have to now drive 12 hours back to Malawi. When we went, we drove back to Malawi, 12 hours in the van, got out. I said, I want to see the church, the Area 47 church. Area 47 is like County 47. Area 47 church, most active church in Eastern Africa. They help support orphans' homes. They help support a hospital. They support feeding stations where people can come and get food.
Food lines.
They send out missionaries to other countries. phenomenally active church. I want to see where this church worships. So we go out into the country, and they worship in a tent.
Tent.
A tent.
And they're doing all of these things.
And it's grass on the inside. Well, now dirt. And when we were there, it wasn't a worship time, so they had taken all of their pews. It was very similar to what I sat on in Tanzania. Their one technology was a blackboard, and they took the two shelves that they had, and they put all of those in the middle so that when the wind blows through the tent, it won't knock them over and break them. And I stood there looking at that. They worship in a tent. Our identification in the United States for a church is that we have to have a big building with a big footprint. And here's a church in Africa. Cultural differences abound in those kind of areas. Very sweet people. If I ever have to have an accountant with me at all times, I will bring a gentleman by the name of Pius from Malawi to the United States. Pius is an accountant. If Pius says we spent $43.99 buttons on such, we spent $43.99 buttons. His name implies his integrity. Marvelous man. Marvelous man. We met people like that all
Everywhere
over.
you went.
All over.
But you wonder what makes them receptive to the message. That's my first question is why, how are you able to reach them?
I think the element is that they don't have much by our comparison.
Appetite for hope, a desire for hope.
For something better. And so
they start to listen, and then they become believers.
and you know, the world that we live in culturally is becoming what's called a post-Christian world, where the term Christian and its belief are just titles. We've seen that in Europe. We see that in the United States. We don't see that as much in Africa because they don't have as many things as we do. And I think because of that, they are more receptive to something better, and that they didn't earn it on their own. In cultures that are more progressive, have more things, we tend to think that, well, we did all this on our own.
Yeah.
And that's not true. God allows us to have that.
That's exactly right.
As we go through the process. So I think that's one of those, if not the major element, because people in the United States are receptive when they're in trouble.
We're going to have to take a break now. We'll be back in just a minute and continue this conversation.
Stay tuned. West Texas View will be right back.